By grace of Allah, we've reached night 3. It's an honor to be with all of you, and we learn from each other. And I learned a lot from your questions yesterday, which is why I want to begin the lecture with some of these questions, conclude on the tafsir of verses 2 and 3, and then move on to the theme for tonight. So, the last 2 nights, we have been dealing with how the Prophet and Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam connected to this metaphysical and divine realm. And yesterday we focused a lot on their psychological strength or psychological dimension. But as I saw, mashallah, a lot from the sisters' questions, that some of you had questions that, okay, if we are investigating now these limitations or human dimensions of Rasulullah or the Imams, how does that link in with their isma or infallibility? And if we start to say, okay, they were worried, or they were distressed, they were stressed, for example, and they had to overcome these distresses, how does that affect then this notion of isma, that they are not committing sin, or that when they are making their decision, these psychological disturbances which they did go through, and which is absolutely clear in the Qur'an, as I showed yesterday, how did then they overcome it, right? So I want to begin with this point and try to answer it directly from Surat al-Qalam and then move on. So if you remember, we said the following in verse 2, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ma anta bi ni'amati rabbika bi majnoon, wa inna laka la ajran ghayra mamnoon. Allah says, you are not, by the blessing of your Lord, crazy or mad, and surely you shall have a reward that is not cut off. Now, what is interesting here is the following, because some of the sisters' questions were asking, well, how does this isma work? And then how, if they've got the psychological stress and distress, how do they overcome it? There are 2 very important things happening here, which just in these few verses gives you the answer. Number 1, according to Mufassirin, at least Allama Tabatabai, Rahimahullahi alayhi in Al-Mizan, he says that this ba here, when you say bi-ni'amati, by the blessing of your Lord, this ba here is known as ba of sababiyya, or the causal ba, the ba that gives you the reason for something. Because ba in Arabic just means with, okay, by or with, that's the general meaning. So you think nothing of it when you read the Qur'an, you think, I'm just reading it. But Allama Tabatabai, as if you have read his tafsir, always interprets things very philosophically and very mystically to give a deeper meaning. He says, and I'll read you the translation, he says that we should translate this verse as the following, and see the difference. He says, by the reason or cause of the blessing of your Lord, you are not crazy. Okay? So, by the reason of, or cause of, the blessing of your Lord, you are not crazy. So there are 2 very important things happening here. Number 1, the Prophet is admitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, I am feeling distressed inside that these people are calling me crazy and calling me sahir, a magician, or kahin, a soothsayer, right? So one, he's admitting this to Allah, because otherwise there is no reason for this verse to come down. And I answered some of the sisters' questions, which is, well, they've got isma, they don't commit sins, so clearly what do they have to worry about? Well, they do have to worry, because they are given free will. With that free will comes choice. The Prophet chooses to hear the criticism or chooses to block out the criticism. Criticisms which especially started at the age of 40, when the revelation of Surat al-Alaq came, and all the way continued till his death. But you can argue that the early period was very, very difficult for him. That's why I did say, and I'm trying to clarify if people were, they were interested, so I'm trying to explore this, is that when I said that our beloved Prophet at age 20, or our beloved Prophet at age 40 or 60, he is a different man. He is going through experiences and developing himself. Okay? We are the same. So I was talking to Abdul Aziz Bhai just now. How do these figures relate to us? Because we undergo changes. If you met me in my 20s, I'm not the same person as I was 40. Yes, I would say I would have the same values. I would say I don't think that has changed. I think my core behavior hasn't changed. But I would say certain habits and certain interests have changed. You know, I have unfortunately not improved on certain habits, as my dear wife will tell you. Please feel free. Because she tells me, Imranali, tell them your true self. So now I'm being honest. I'm answering the promise of my wife. So, and my cousin is also looking at me. It's two people, two women. You have to be very, my dear cousin as well, Fahim is there. So we are a bit together in the boat, inshallah. And men, inshallah. So, you know, I'm being honest that I haven't let go of certain habits. But other habits I have retained and I have strengthened, right? And I want to give you this example from our beloved Prophet's life, okay? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay, so I gave you the example yesterday that the mushrikeen were calling him these names of Majnoon and Kahin and Sahir. I'll give you another example to make this point very clear to you, how this relationship between Allah and Isma and the Prophet is working, okay? After Surat al-Qalam, Surat al-Muzammil is revealed, right? Surat al-Muzammil, as mashallah one auntie said, Muzammil means the one who is wrapped up, okay? Ya ayyuhal muzammil, ummil layla illa qalila. Stand in the night except a little. Now look at this point of development and overcoming psychological disturbance and distress. Surat al-Qalam and then Surat al-Muzammil. So how many years have passed? Difficult to say. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Sometimes people say more than that. But let's say a period of a few years have passed, right? Even after few years, our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, is still feeling the effects of the names people are calling him. Number one. You know, when somebody insults you, even if it's one word, it could be 10 years ago, doesn't it stay with you? If you were to meet that person again, when you look at their face, what's the first thing that you think? That person said this to me. I don't want to talk to this person. Would you say that's true? And it's so difficult then to rebuild the relationship or to ignore that feeling you have inside of you, right? Very difficult, and that's how relationships break. That is why we respect Rasulullah, because he is rahmatul lil alameen. He is a mercy unto all of the worlds, that he demonstrates mercy even to his enemies. Al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam, how much mercy did he show in his life? Even when Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, as it is reported in Kitab al-Irshad by Shaykh al-Mufid, when Hur meets al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam, and Hur was one of the biggest enemies of al-Husayn, Hur, his heart begins to flutter, his conscience begins to awaken. He sees al-Husayn, he sees a pious man standing for justice. And one of his soldiers says, Hur, why are you leaving your post? Why are you going to Hussein? Why are you going to the other side? What are you doing? I mean, for a soldier to do that, it's a crime. You get executed for that. You cannot, give allegiance to somebody else. But Hur goes to al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam, and he says, Ya Abu Abdullah, he says, I find myself between heaven and hell, and I will not prefer anything until I am cut to pieces. He says, Ya Husayn ibn Ali, can you ever forgive me? Can you ever forgive me for stopping you in your tracks? Can you ever forgive me for making your journey difficult? I was the one that made your journey difficult. He's crying, he's on his knees to al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam. And he says, can you ever forgive me? What does Imam Hussain say? He doesn't look at his face and say, you are the one that did this to me. He says, I forgive you and Allah forgives you. This is the grandson of Rasulullah. That is the mercy of the Prophet carrying on unto the Ahlul Bayt, and inshallah to us, hopefully in these majalis. Right? So this is why I'm saying that, going back to Surah Al-Muzammil, 3 years, just to give a rough period, he's still feeling the effects of this, right? Now, at this point, Prophet could have cursed, Prophet could have got angry, Prophet could have hit back. There is a verse in Surah Al-Qalam which exactly deals with this. And it is towards the end of Surah Al-Qalam, inshallah we may deal with it tomorrow. And it is the verse which starts, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ. Be patient unto the judgment of your Lord. Okay, that's a very direct verse to the Prophet. Very direct. Because there is a heightening of the anger he feels, and the example of Prophet Yunus is given. It's a very interesting story, which I'll do tomorrow. So I'm trying to do a sequel. Some sequels are not good. I hope mine is, inshallah. I don't know if you saw latest Mission Impossible movie. It's very good, by the way. The Indiana Jones was okay, but Mission Impossible was very good. Okay, wife is looking at me. Why are you watching movies? Some movies are good to watch. Good, movies not with bad things, but nice movies. Okay, inshallah. I haven't told you some of the Bollywood movies we watch, but nice ones. My wife knows my choices. I don't watch these rubbish ones. Some good actors, good acting, inshallah. Yes. But my point is that, inshallah, there will be a good sequel tomorrow, okay? But at this particular stage, let me give you the original movie, if you like, okay? After 3 years, Allah tells the Prophet, look, I know that you are still feeling hurt. Look at the solution Allah gives the Prophet. قُمْ مِنْ Stand in the night, إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Stand in the night, just accept a little. Now this is the verse of Salatul Layl, which I did mention in the first majalis. It is the first wajib prayer, obligatory prayer to be revealed ever in Islam, Salatul Layl. Okay? This obligatory prayer was revealed to Rasulullah, not so that he gets just thawab, not so that he fulfills his salah for the day, not that because Allah has just commanded him. This salah was revealed to ease the disturbances that the Prophet felt in his heart. And why? Because at night there is no disturbance that is felt, either by words that people say, either by the thoughts that you say in the day, because even when you're walking to work or driving in the car, those thoughts still come. But at the night there is silence. It is you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now, if it takes the Prophet 3 years, and even then, a prayer is revealed for him, not for us, by the way. This prayer was not revealed for the rest of the community. It started to be revealed gradually for the rest of the community. It was only for the Prophet. And so, when the Prophet begins to rise, what is he commanded to say? وَرَتَّلَ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Recite the Qur'an in a measured fashion. Not like what we do. We want to do Yasin and finish it in 10 minutes, right? Because we have timings of programs. It is better to do 5 verses or 10 verses and understand it. This is how the Qur'an was taught to the companions of Rasulullah. Marhum Ayatul Akhui mentions this. He mentions a hadith in the prolegomena to the Qur'an. It is there on al-Islam.org. You can refer to it. He mentions a bit about how the Qur'an was taught. Okay? So, the Prophet is commanded to recite the Qur'an very slowly, in a measured way, and only the Qur'an that was revealed to him. Now, was Surah Al-Fatiha revealed at this point? Perhaps not. There is some opinion that it wasn't. And maybe there is opinion that it was. Okay? I've tried to do research on this. It's difficult to say. But certainly, he did stand up, he did do qiyam, and he did recite certain verses. We know that much. And it appears at least there was some sense of ruku and sajda, yes. Okay? And not only that, he also reflected after the salah as well. So there was a concept of meditation and tafakkur. So now, my point is that hopefully I'm trying to give you a logical sort of sequence here, that in the Prophet's life, we started from him appealing to Allah, 2, because he felt distresses, and 3, hopefully, inshallah, we can find more value in salah, and the reason for salah is that the salah eased these disturbances in us or in the Prophet, and that is why Salatul Layl became a recommended prayer only when the 5 prayers was revealed. Otherwise, if the 5 prayers were not revealed, probably Salatul Layl would at least be obligatory upon us. And not obligatory the whole 11 rak'at, for example, even just a portion of it, because there are some ahadith which say that even, for example, the Salatul Witr or the 2 rak'at Salatul Nafila, that is obligatory, but the rest is not obligatory. There are different narrations as to which parts were obligatory at the time. Okay? So, to begin my first point, and hopefully to answer this question to you, is that this ni'mah, or this blessing that the Prophet is receiving, is the blessing of comfort, is the blessing of Salatul Layl, is the blessing of Allah easing the Prophet's heart. So to answer some of the sisters' question, that blessing is known as lutf, grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we have in Shia theology. Grace is very difficult to quantify. Whenever we feel ease, whenever we feel love amongst our family, whenever we feel warmth in this very beautiful gathering, that maybe you can say is a kind of grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has blessed this gathering because when we feel comfort and ease, not comfort and ease in ourselves, but in the presence of Allah, that we can call grace. So I want to make a distinction. If I feel comfortable myself, it's not necessarily grace. I'm thinking about myself. It's my ego. But if I feel grace, if I feel comfort, which leads me to think beyond myself and thinking about you, thinking about doing something for you, thinking about reaching for Allah, that we can say is lutf, is the divine grace, where Allah is pulling us towards Him. Allama Tabatabai Rahimahullah gives a very beautiful example of this in Kernel of the Kernel or Lub al-Lubab. He says, and I said this narration to you, I think in the last 2 majalises, where we, the children of Adam, we can see the heavens and the earth according to the Prophet, but we surround ourselves by the whispers of the different shayateen or shaitans. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine presence operates a bit like this in the universe. He says, from time to time, you will feel wafts or breaths of grace or divine presence coming to you. When we are walking, as I gave the example, when you feel love in the family, love, if you feel warmth in the gathering, this you can say is a kind of breath of Allah. Okay? He says from time to time Allah will directly blow His breath into a situation. Okay? He says these breaths are there of Allah. And we should be in a position to capture that breath. To understand that this is a grace of Allah upon me and He is pulling me towards Him. Now, and some of the sisters, maybe they're more intelligent because I'm getting these very intelligent questions from some of the sisters. How does humanness work and all these things work? Isma work? This is a specific answer. Our beloved prophets and Imams, they were able to recognize divine breaths and capture them. And because they were able to capture them, that, if you like, enabled them to have this sense of isma, this sense of divine protection or guidance and ilham not to commit sin. They were able to see the folliness or badness and foolishness of a bad deed, which sometimes we can't see because we look at ourselves first. Is that clear? Okay. I'll give you this other example. This did not come automatically. Some of the dear uncles, I'm also giving you credit, inshallah. Some of the dear uncles said, so at age 40, okay, this revelation occurred, so what was Prophet doing before the age of 40? What exactly was happening? Now we hear in madaris, in our madrasas and in majalis so many times, Prophet was known as as-Sadiq and al-Amin. The truthful one and the trustworthy one. Okay, he was a tajir, he was a trader, he was working under Lady Khadija. Okay, he was an orphan, he lost his parents at a young age. Abu Talib was the guardian. So that's maybe 2 madrasa lessons I've given you, because we generally expand it, but you can teach this in 5 minutes. What is the more important thing to teach, I feel, is this. According to Siratul Nabawiyah, one of the early historical texts we have about the history of the Prophet, it clearly states that before the revelation of Suratul Alaq, before the first revelation, the Prophet went into the cave of Hira on a regular basis, on a regular interval, and was engaging in tahannuth. Tahannuth, as I mentioned before, is a kind of dhikr and a kind of meditation and reflection, calling upon the names of Allah and meditating on Allah's divine presence. That's what the Prophet was doing. Some other reports say from Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, from his tafsir, although some have questioned the authenticity of his tafsir, so I want to be honest with you. But this is just to give you a kind of picture, is that he used to walk amongst the caves and the hills and the valleys and kind of reflect on God's presence as well, calling out to Allah. So this is what he was doing, right? So he was doing this on a regular basis to do what? To recognize when that vibration of sound, or the noon and alif lam mim was revealed to him, that he could recognize that this was Allah talking and not himself and not shaitan, that this was Allah. He had built up a sense of what could be heard and what could be distinguished from the inner depths of his soul. Okay? I want to give us some practical answer, because some of you may say, well, how do we do that? Sometimes we might feel we are right? Okay, mashallah, OIL as a very open-minded organization and a very intellectual organization and very free-thinking organization, which I think is a very wonderful vision, okay? We might feel, and me as a lecturer participating might say, yes, this is what we feel is correct in order to understand Islam. That there should be no limitations in asking questions, in discussing things. Okay, fine. Now you'll say, how do we know that's right? I'm just being direct. How do we know that's right? How do we know that the setup of this gathering, right, is correct? In another center, they say, no, our setup of the gathering is correct, right? Or our way of majalis is correct. Our way of commemorating Muharram is correct. Everybody has different viewpoints. In a family, people might disagree and argue. In an organization, a workplace, no, this should be the vision, that should be the vision, right? So, the only way we can recognize this is to know, number one, that our decisions are not made through stubbornness and pride, and two, that come what may, we are yielding to and sacrificing every single niyyah, because as I said, our niyyah can get corrupted. Every niyyah that we have engaged in, every action, every breath, every word is for the sake of Allah and another. And that we are prepared even to sacrifice certain things for the betterment of society. This was, in a nutshell, the Prophet's attitude in guiding society. Even in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, as you are all aware, the Mushrikeen and the rest of the Quraysh said, when Imam Ali alayhi salam was, by the way, signing the treaty, it wasn't the Prophet, because one of the sisters did mention, could the Prophet read or write? Well, we don't have reports that he ever wrote. Okay, Imam Ali, it appears, could write, so he signed. He obviously said, you know, Rasulullah, Messenger of Muhammad, Rasulullah. They didn't recognize that and say, we don't recognize as the Prophet. Say Muhammad ibn Abdullah, son of Abdullah. That's what we recognize. Prophet accepted to forego his prophetic status and prophethood in front of the society in signing this treaty. How many of us would be able to forego our position for the betterment? Do you see that? That is why in this verse, this blessing of the Lord is the blessing of the ability, which Ibn Arabi in his tafsir says is basira, insight, discernment, or deep spiritual vision. Prophet was blessed with spiritual vision that others did not see. So what did they say? They said, you are Majnoon. We don't understand your vision, you're crazy. What are you doing going into the cave of Hira? And who are you talking to exactly? You're coming out and you are saying all these verses. They said, you are crazy. This is how they looked at Prophet. And it's no different in our time as well. Some of our own Shia scholars have been ostracized so badly. Look, I'm quoting from Allama Tabatabai, yes? All of you, I'm sure, have heard of him, Al-Mizan. Today we are celebrating his work. If you have watched that very good serial or series on YouTube in English and Farsi, Allama Tabatabai, Allama Tabatabai's views weren't accepted in Qum 50, 60, 70 years ago. He couldn't even teach philosophy and mysticism in Qum. And too, when he started writing Al-Mizan, people didn't want to engage with it as such. But now today it's a celebrated work. Everybody quotes Al-Mizan. And why was he ostracized? Because he started to introduce philosophy and mysticism in his tafsir, which really hadn't been done before, at least amongst the Shia works, right? Mullah Sadr of 16th, 17th century, a grand scholar, philosopher and mystic. And if you go to Qum, if you go to Mashhad, his Asfal Arba is taught in seminaries. But what happened in his time? He had a fatwa against him, ostracized. He had to leave with his family from his home place and live in Kahak. I think it's outside of Qum for some years. So our own Shia scholars have ostracized our Shia scholars. Why? Because they think these guys are crazy. Literally. So look, the Prophet was the one who was ostracized. Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, in his own times, what did people used to say? Look, Husayn ibn Ali, we know you are the son of Ali. We know you are the grandson of Rasulullah. But when he departed from Makkah and Madinah, what did they say? Look, just give allegiance to Yazid. Give allegiance, because you will avoid the bloodshed and you can still preach as an Imam. You still do your work, still preach, but give allegiance. He said, no. This Yazid, and I have it in front of me, he said that this Yazid is, drinks khamar, he drinks wine. He drinks wine. And not only does he drink wine, he portrays himself to be a Khalif, and a Khalif of a so-called Islamic government and an Islamic society. How can a man like me give allegiance to a man like him? So even though al-Husayn ibn Ali stood on this principle, people were still did not understand his message. So the blessing that the Prophet received is that this infallibility operates on the basis of free choice. But that free choice means that one, the Prophet has to make an effort, tahannuth, being truthful trading, operating with people in a trustworthy way. This is all Prophet. This is not revelation, this is himself, this is his fitrah. With that effort, he then is seeking Allah, and then Allah gives him that blessing and lutf, which he captures and does not want to let go. So he keeps going back to Cave of Hira. He keeps wanting to seek out Allah. He keeps sacrificing his time for other people. He keeps feeding the orphan. He doesn't let go because he's falling in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, in the hadith that I have here, this ni'mah is interpreted in different ways. Some say basira, which is that deep insight into the reality of things. and a hadith from As-Sadiq alayhi salam in Tafsir al-Safi by Allama Fayd al-Kashani, 18th century scholar, says actually the blessing which the Prophet received was the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The love. And I'll illustrate this to you. Why is Prophet known as Ummi? Anybody know Ummi, what it means? Sorry, some people, yes? Unlettered, very good. Any other?
Well, because I believe that the area around Makkah was called al-Qalam.
MashaAllah, so the two answers, unlettered, and also that the villages or surrounding area was of Makkah. Yes, that's actually exactly from the Majmal Bayan. Allama Tabrisi. Anybody else? Yes? MashaAllah, what did you say? Yeah, what did you say? Something maternal. MashaAllah, salawat please. MashaAllah, you want to give majlis now. You've explained the point now, I don't have to explain it, MashaAllah. Okay? So the sister is, all of you are actually correct because it's based on your decision, by the way. But, and this is the interpretation of Allama Tabatabai, that he is known as Ummi. Yes, literally it does mean unlettered or illiterate, but I don't like illiterate because that has indicates that he lacked intelligence, which is incorrect. That he was not taught reading or writing, that he is of Makkah. But the most philosophical interpretation is that he was born of the mothering or maternal instinct of Allah himself. Ummi, that he's born of the mother, but born of Allah. Nobody taught him how to read or write. Prophet did not go to a formal school to understand revelation or to receive these verses. He didn't start revising Bible and Torah and said, now I'm ready to receive revelation of Qur'an. He said, I do not trust anybody with my education except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I marvel at that all the time. Because when I'm preparing my majlis, and I'm being very honest with you, I'm reading the tafsir, certain thoughts are coming to me and I'm thinking, okay, how far do I go with my thoughts? And how far do I trust the material I'm reading? I do trust the material I'm reading, but I'm making an intellectual decision, right? Giving you the different viewpoints. But the Prophet let go of everything and followed his heart, his spiritual and intellectual instinct, and was able to receive this divine wisdom. And I would say, maybe if you agree, some of our best thoughts come from intuition. Would you agree? You know, when you don't think and you immediately think clearly for that 1 second, that 1 second gives you maybe the decision for the rest of your life, right? Or the decision for the next several weeks, or the decision which allows you to then plant or create a strategy with details. Now the Prophet was receiving this intuition, regularly. And Shaykh al-Mudaffar, Muhammad al-Mudaffar, famous Shia scholar, passed away, who wrote Usul al-Mudaffar, Mantiq al-Mudaffar. These are the key texts you study in the Hawza. He says in his Mantiq, he says, intuition is one of the lowest forms of wahi. Which is a very beautiful point. Because wahi, according to Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, in one of his Qur'an works, he says that wahi can be translated as a fast signal. A fast signal. And that is basically intuition. Even bees receive wahi, by the way. Right? They're guided to the honeycomb and all that. So everything receives wahi. Wahi is not something exclusive for prophets. Animals receive wahi. We may receive some kind of wahi. It's just the degree and level to which we receive it. So you can see that the blessing the Prophet actually received was one, the love of Allah which he sought, and two, is that this instruction or wisdom which was taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfected his wisdom, perfected his intellect. And I say perfected because it wasn't complete. You cannot say that the Prophet's wisdom was complete at age 40. Otherwise, why were verses of Qur'an continued revealed till his death, till the age of 63? If everything was perfect, why receive other verses? Why receive guidance at particular stages all the time to guide you? Prophet was receiving guidance in every specific stage, so that guidance was to perfect his decision-making power, how to behave during situations. And not only how to behave in situations, but to resolve the situation in front of him. When to stay quiet and when to speak. When to communicate and say this verse to an audience and when not to say it. There were periods in the Prophet's life where for long periods, Prophet didn't receive revelation. He didn't receive any revelation. The first 19 verses of Surat al-Muzammil were revealed relatively quickly. This of Salatul Layl, okay? But verse 20, which was revealed in Madinah, so the first 19 revealed in Makkah, and then the last verse was revealed in Madinah. Now the gap between those 19 verses and the last verse of Surat al-Muzammil was 6 months, 12 months, 1 year or 3 years. So what was happening then? What was happening? Prophet in fact called out, "Oh Allah, why aren't you giving me any verses of Qur'an?" Now was it because Allah wanted to train his soul? Was it because Allah wanted him to have patience? Was it because Allah wanted him to get into the practice of praying Salatul Layl? This is another question, by the way, which sometimes after majalis, some people ask me, and inshallah we learn together, is, why should we pray? How can I pray? I feel lazy when I pray. It's too much for me, I pray later on, I pray my qada later, right? Or for example, I can't focus on my prayer, right? This prayer is not for me because I'm a very impure person. I've also heard that, by the way, right? What I don't understand with these sort of answers is, if we read the Qur'an, we just sit and read it, okay? Prophet is commanded to pray Salatul Layl. So he is commanded to pray it, to train him, number one. 2, he isn't asked to pray all of it at once. قُمْ مِنْ لَيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Pray in the night, except a little, just a little. Just pray a little, please. Not too much, As I've said before, maybe we'll deal with it, and we have this practice in our masajid. He wasn't asked to do 3 hours of amal on one night. I still don't understand where this came from, but I do have an answer for it, which I will give in the Saturday seminar, where this idea came from, that on the 23rd night we do Dua Makarim Akhlaq, Dua Tawbah, we do the amal, we do Rakat Namaz, we put everything together, okay? This is something actually that we made a decision afterwards, or community made a decision afterwards through historical and cultural means, not through revelation or looking at history correctly. Because the Prophet himself was never ever commanded to put pressure on his soul and shoulders to accomplish spiritual greatness at once. Never was he commanded that. Salawat, please. If you permit me, I will just read out a few of the rest of the verses because I want to give you an accurate answer for this. Yes, here. Okay. Allah says, قُمْ مِنْ لَيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا نِصْفَهُ أَوْ انْقُصْ مِنْهُ قَلِيلًا أَوْ زِدْ عَلَيْهِ وَرَتَّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Allah gives options to Rasulullah to pray the Salatul Layl depending on his spiritual aptitude at the time, depending on his tiredness, depending on his time, and to enable his soul to adjust to the prayer. So if we translate this, stand in the night except a little, or half of it, or a little from that half except a little, or add to it and recite the Qur'an in a measured way. It's up to you, Rasulullah. You pray, because Allah knows that during the day, what is the Prophet doing? La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And the Prophet is feeding the orphans. And the Prophet is being persecuted. And the Prophet doesn't have food. And the Prophet is being ostracized. And the Prophet is, receiving stones on his face. And people are cursing him from his back. Poor guy. When it comes to night time, now imagine, this is what we say during Amal nights, don't we? 23rd night Amal comes, as some people say, right, I want to go to masjid, I want to feel spiritual. And I want to feel spiritual, but how do I measure my spirituality? How do I begin my spiritual journey? I don't want to feel guilty if I miss something. Sometimes all these questions are there. Look at Allah's motherly, as the sister said, look at Allah's motherly and measured communication to our beloved Prophet. You start in the night a little. If you feel the spiritual strength, add to it, pray half, add more if you want. Now we have an answer. That for 3 years or 1 year, there was a gap between those 19 verses and the last verse, because Allah was training the Prophet to get disciplined to pray the Salatul Layl. When he got disciplined, by the way, then he started teaching it to the rest of the community. And only a few people started to pray with him. Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Lady Khadija salamullah alayha, may Allah bless her. So few people, Ammar ibn Yasir, few people started praying. Look at the spiritual station of Lady Khadija as one of the early companions and the first convert to Islam. The first. Because people often say Ali ibn Abi Talib, but a woman was the first convert, if you like, to Islam. Okay? So look at this spiritual insight even that Lady Khadija had. After that, he started to teach the rest of the community to pray. And how much time I have? 8:40, 5 minutes, just to double check? Yes. 5 minutes, okay, inshallah. Abdul Aziz is a timekeeper. He's directly looking at me. You're on a game show, and there's a time there to answer a question. That's how I feel. It's like, I have to answer the question, okay? So, in this early bit, when the Prophet was teaching the rest of the community, and you have these reports I'm giving, I want to give you the sources in Majmal Bayan, you have the Safi, in other Sunni sources, people started to pray with the Prophet. They really started to pray. So in the first day, there was a lot of people praying Salatul Layl with him. Okay. The second day, you see half of the people praying Salatul Layl. Because, it's at night. And, it's some 7 rakats, reciting Qur'an, you're standing in the night. The third day, you have a quarter of people. And the fourth day, the Prophet looks back, and there are a few people only praying, okay? It's the same thing which happens today, right? Even in Majalis and Amal, same thing. Why did this happen? Okay? Because according to in Majmal Bayan, there was a man who basically, when he was praying, he was so excited to pray this prayer that he stood the whole night. The whole night he stood up. He did not sleep at all. He didn't sleep, and his legs started aching, and then I think his wife perhaps started to complain that, my husband is staying awake the whole night. Like, is this correct? I mean, is this how he should pray, right? And even the man himself didn't actually know, like, when he should stop. Right? So you can also see, even in that time, people didn't always understand like how best to do it. And then the Prophet had to guide them further, right? So when this incident of this man happened and the rest of the community feeling tired, then at that point, Salatul Layl became mustahab. You see that? It became recommended. So that's why it's recommended today. Because people do find it difficult to pray in the night. And then there is one theory that we have prayers spread throughout the day for us, that Allah has made it an ease for us. Now I will end here, hopefully to tie in the conclusion, give the maqtal, that I began with these divine breaths. So each prayer of Fajr, of Dhuhr, of Asr, of Maghrib and Isha is a divine breath from Allah. If Allah wanted, He could have left it to Salatul Layl. But He's giving us the opportunity to capture His presence throughout the day. Look how easy Allah has made this religion. And not only that, in short units, 2 and 4 and 4 and whatever, right? So He's giving us this opportunity to capture the divine breaths. He's giving us opportunity to follow in the footsteps of Rasulullah. He's giving us opportunity, therefore, as I said yesterday, that if we, and I gave the example of alcohol, that if today I am not drinking alcohol, and maybe I've achieved 1% or 2% isma there is a lot more we can achieve. So to end with the tafsir of this verse and then do the maqtal is, this بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِمَجْنُونَ means that the Prophet was given the blessing of love and insight to capture the divine breath, which gave him the confidence that he was not crazy, which at night he was able to block out the criticism, and therefore he could strive in his mission and not give up until he passed away at age 63. And it is that same spirit that al-Husayn ibn Ali al-Islam captured on the plains of Karbala. Salawat. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. My dear brothers and sisters, on the journey to Karbala, there is a beautiful conversation between father and son. That is al-Husayn ibn Ali al-Islam and Ali al-Akbar. That is the one, that is Ali al-Akbar, who resembled the face and the mannerisms of Rasulullah. That in that camp, when Zainab salamullahi alayha saw that people were being killed one by one, that al-Husayn's companions were being killed one by one, they looked to Ali al-Akbar for that sense that Rasulullah's presence and spirit is with them. As we might do in our families today even, when we want to remember someone. But this conversation showed the basira, or insight, that al-Husayn and Ali al-Akbar had. In fact, his son had. Look at this difference. Al-Husayn ibn Ali al-Islam is riding on that horse with his son. And so the father shares his thought with his son. Oh my beloved son, I now feel that death is coming closer to us. I feel that now this is going to be our fate. Al-Husayn is that worried in that sense that he feels this sense there that death is coming. So Ali al-Akbar says, my beloved father, aren't we doing something right? Look at even this stage. They are questioning their niyyah. They are questioning whether they are right or not. This is al-Husayn and Ali al-Akbar. Ali al-Akbar says his father, aren't we doing something right? Are we not on the right course? Al-Husayn says, yes we are, my son, of course we are. And Ali al-Akbar says, then my beloved father, it doesn't matter whether we are moving towards death or death is coming to us. This was the resolve of the family of al-Husayn ibn Ali al-Salam, that when they went into battle and the arrows went into their chest and their limbs were severed, or one-to-one combat was broken, or they fell to the ground calling out, oh my uncle, oh my father, Ya Aba Abdullah, oh grandson of Rasulullah, when they called out, even though they called out these things, they called out of love for the mission of al-Husayn ibn Ali al-Islam. That is why today my heart, our hearts are emotional, that a young man like Ali al-Akbar understands death, that his father is having this conversation with his son about death. That means when they went into the battlefield, can you imagine that they had to let go of their family members and say, Ya Allah, I choose you, I choose the akhirah over the family that I'm leaving behind. Oh Allah, you have willed death, and therefore I am not scared of it. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you on this blessed day to please bless us with your blessing that you blessed Rasulullah with. Give us basira, give us your love, give us the ability to be strong, that we do not waver in our niyyah, our intention and our actions. O Allah, please forgive our sins. Please, O Allah, forgive the sins and bless the stations of our beloved marhumeen. Help us fight oppression, and may you hasten the reappearance of our dear 12th Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi, ajalallahu farajahu. رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا مَعَ قَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. Surah Al-Fatiha. MashaAllah, Jazakallah. So the two things, yes, at the time of Uthman and before, there was no nukta or a dot, as we say, or fatha, kasra, dhamma, on the huruf, on the letters. Why? Because the Arabs knew their language. That's one thing. But two, as Hussein Uncle did rightly say, is there were different qira'at or different recitation styles which still exist till today. There are several, and people are trained in this. If you go different parts of the world, I mean, I was in Jordan, for example. One of the teachers that was teaching us, he actually did PhD on this, was educating us on this. You go to parts of Africa, they have a different style of tajweed, you have a different style in certain parts of Arabia. So these things are still today, by the way, right? And even, although I have it in my notes, but I didn't say it because it becomes too technical, is any tafsir work you open, even especially Majma al-Bayan, the first part of it is qira'at, okay, is recitation. In fact, there is no unanimous agreement, for example, on how certain letters are said, basically. I mean, I'll give you a simple example to this point. You know, we say, Sirat al-Mustaqim is Sad, right? But actually, the original is Sirat, with a sin. Because Sirat, Sarata means to swallow or gulp. And when you say Sirat means a path. It means a path that is very big and open, which can swallow you up, if you like. Alright? Even that, I'm just giving a simple example, that people used to either recite with different letters, or used to say words, for example, with different fatha, kasra and dhamma. Okay? So they didn't say sirat, they might have said surat. I'm just giving an example, right? So, that is a historical fact. And that doesn't mean you're reciting the Qur'an wrongly. But your recitation has to be within those accepted models of qira'at. And two, yes, Ali ibn Abi Talib was that source of grammar. He was the one that came up with a lot of grammar rules. And in fact, you will find Arabic books referring back to him. So that is there. Now, what I have to look at, and what I'm not sure about, is this committee that you have said was there a discussion about Uthman telling Ali ibn Islam to be the... Possible, but I haven't looked at that hadith, so I don't want to say something which is wrong. But what I can say with certainty is definitely Ali ibn Islam was that source of Arabic grammar, yes. Yes, inshallah. Sure, Jazakallah. I'll repeat the question, I did forget the first repeating. So the question was, to what degree can we understand isma and the ability of prophets and imams to make certain errors and mistakes? And the example that the dear brother gave was, can the imam get lost on his travels, right? You said yes. Can the imam get lost on his road or travels? And two is, how do we understand adiyah or supplications when they're saying, oh Allah, forgive me, for example, for having a bad intention? Yes? So to answer the first point, there are different views on this. I'm just trying to summarize very quickly, but in the text that I shared with you, Al-Bab al-Hadi Ashar by Allama Hilli, which in fact the other major text is Kashf al-Murad, but in that text, the way our theology works is even these kind of things, where Imam getting lost, or let's say having some illness which causes aversion, right? Which causes that nufur, that kind of sense that I dislike this Imam, or I look at this Imam negatively, one answer that I'm giving you is, a number of our Shia scholars say that any action which the Imam does, like getting lost, or even they say standing or walking while drinking, right? If a person sees that, in that time they would think, oh, I'm not following the Prophet or Imam, they don't have very good habits. Or I don't like the look of this Imam, he has a big pimple or something. Really, I'm giving you specific examples, right? They go into these very specific things, right? One answer is that if that action leads to aversion or dislike, then that would not be acceptable for the Prophet or Imam. Okay? The other view to that is, some say that's quite an extreme view of a Prophet and Imam, because after all they are human beings. So clearly they do get ill, and we do have reports of, Prophet, for example, going on the camel, or maybe asking advice of his ashab, companions, where to go or how to make a decision. We have these things. So some say, no, it can't be to this degree, right? It has to be only on those sins, if you like, which are causing corruption in his soul and corruption in the revelation. So I want to be objective, and I'm giving you two different views then. You can decide, right? With the dua, a number of these adiyah or supplications deal with the internal dimension of prophets and imams. As I mentioned, I think, to one of the sisters yesterday, that the prophets and imams have the qudra or capability to commit a good or bad action. They do have the ability to have a bad intention. They do have the ability to get angry. They do. So when they are saying, oh Allah, forgive me for having that intention or having anger inside of me, that's perfectly fine, because they're appealing to Allah to guide them or comfort them that does not manifest into a sin. Yes? Okay? And that's why, as I gave the example of the dua that on the day of Ashura that Imam Husayn supplicated, he said, oh Allah, you are my hope, raja'i, min kulli karbin, or kulli shiddatin, in every difficulty or calamity, because I don't want to lose hope. I don't want to lose trust in you. If I lose trust in you, what am I? How can I be an imam standing, for your message if I don't even have trust in you? So they were genuinely worried that in their soul, they want to make sure that trust is there. Do you see that? So my reading of some of these adiyah is that it is much more to do with the internal dimensions that the prophets and the imams are facing, inshallah.
So, my knowledge is quite sketchy in these subjects.
Yes.
But when you said that Prophet Muhammad was going regularly to the cave Hira, and he was meditating on Allah.
Yes.
So he was meditating all the time. He knew what he was expecting. But what I understand was that when Jibreel came and grabbed him and squeezed him and said, recite, he said, I can't.
Yes.
And he came running home to Khadija and said, I'm mad.
Yes.
So he didn't expect that. Or did he expect it?
Sure. Yes, mashallah, very good point. So the hadith says, you are absolutely right, uncle, that when Jibreel came and he says, Ikra, the Prophet says, Ma akra'u. Ma akra'u, according to one meaning, means, what do I recite? Okay? There is another phraseology there, Ma ana biqari'in. Ma ana biqari'in means I am not a reciter. They're two different. Okay, but I'll deal with ma. Ma akra'u means, what do I recite? Which means that the Prophet at that particular stage, when Angel Jibreel came to him, he didn't immediately know what to recite and did not recognize immediately what to recite. In fact, it is repeated 3 to 4 times in the hadith. Jibreel presses on the Prophet's chest. It presses hard, that's what he feels. Ikra ma'akro, ikra ma'akro, ikra ma'akro. Recite, what do I recite? Recite, what do I recite? So it took time for the Prophet's soul to adjust to this type, if you like, of frequency, we can say. Okay, that's to answer your first point. So he did know eventually, but it was an adjustment period. 2, this hadith of running out of the cave of Hira, a number of our Shia scholars do not accept it, and I'll give you one reference for this. This is Ayatullah Hadi Ma'arifa rahmatullahi alayhi was a very beautiful book which we in part studied, Talkhis wa Tamheed. This is the introduction to the Quranic sciences. I think 2 parts are translated into English. Is published by, I think, is it ICAS Press maybe? You should buy it. It's 2 volumes and very easy to read. He says a number of Shia scholars reject this. Why? For a couple of reasons, and I'll end it quickly. Prophet cannot run out of the cave saying, I've gone mad, because if you accept that, that means Prophet cannot distinguish between Allah and Shaitan. And this causes a huge problem then. Because if he can't distinguish, how do we know that the Quran is true? And if he himself can't distinguish between truth and falsehood, then it becomes a huge problem for the protection of the Quran. That's 1. 2, why should the Prophet go to Waraqah ibn Nawfal, the uncle of Khadija, for confirmation, affirmation that he's a prophet? Why does he have to go to... So is Waraqah's station higher than the Prophet? Has Waraqah been meditating in cave of Hira? It doesn't make sense. And 3, to fling himself almost to the committing suicide, that means the Prophet is not in control of his emotions. Right? So a lot of people reject this hadith, that this is, Israeliyat, this is, some of the Jewish people at the time, nothing against Jewish or Christian community, but those people or enemies that were against Rasulullah fabricated these narrations.
Just always wondered, the language of the Quran, Arabic language of the Quran, was that the exact same language like the Prophet and the people in Saudi were speaking? Because a lot of time I meet an Arab or somebody and ask them, so you're so lucky you can understand the whole Quran. And they say, no, you can't really understand they know some of the words, but they don't know the actual ayahs.
So Jazakallah. So the question was, and I forgot to summarize the previous question, but the question was, why is it today that some of the Arabs, like in Saudi Arabia, who speak Arabic, may not understand the Quran, and is there a difference between the Quranic or the Arabic that was revealed in the Arabic today? So to answer your question, yes, there is Fusha, as some of you know, that is the classical formal Arabic, which you speak according to the rules of grammar, and that is the Arabic of the Quran. And there is Ammiya, that is, if you like, the colloquial general Arabic that Arabs speak, and there are different even dialects, okay? Iraqi dialect, Jordanian dialect, Egyptian dialect, okay? So first of all, the revelation of the Quran, that Arabic that was revealed, you can still study today. That is what you study in Hausa, in seminary. You go to a classical Arabic class. If you understand that, you can understand Quran, number 1. But when some Arabs say that I don't understand, it's because they're speaking colloquial Arabic. Maybe to give an example, it's like Shakespearean English and then the English today. And there's a vast difference. If you open Shakespeare, we might find a little difficulty understanding it, but we can understand some things, right? Okay? Hath, has, for example, thou, you, thee, you, all these things, right? And that's a bit like the Ammiya. That is a colloquial kind of Arabic.